About that, they're all going now.
We might need you to
Yes, I'm
change.
sorry about that. We had a panic there because of the. All I was seeing was the front directories and not the individual slides. Yeah. You might have to use
okay.
the mouse to,
Our speaker's just disappeared.
Actually, I might do that.
But you'll be
I
back
might
in a
sit
minute.
here and do the movement for him, if that's okay.
Just going to walk to the hall.
Could you actually stand over there so I can see that I've got it in the correct spot? So I'll just focus on you here, as if you're giving the talk.
Oh, right, yes, need a person to.
I just
make sure
need
that we
to
get
make
that.
sure that I
Okay.
terrific. Thank you.
My mouse won't allow him to progress the slides. I'll need to sort of just let him say next slide or that sort of.
Okay. We're almost there. But not to worry.
There wouldn't be a difference between
We're 10 minutes late. It doesn't matter. We've got a half an hour tea break. We can cut into that one.
okay.
And, I thought that when I looked at it, I thought that was, but it's not. It's wrong shape. He's got this. He's got the old original.
I'm glad I left us plenty of time to set up.
This way. Now, the mouse won't not line up, so just tell me when you want to dance.
Yeah, I guess so. Next slide.
Or back or whatever.
No show without lunch.
I won't tell you what I'll do. I won't lean on your coat.
Right, I shall introduce you, Cole.
Okay. I'll go. Notwithstanding this kid there.
Right. Well, welcome members and visitors. Thank you all very much for attending today. And as you can see, we're finally ready to roll. Now, Colin probably doesn't need introduction, but for those of you who really don't know him, Colin's been a member of the ANS for well over 50 years. He's
60 years, I'd say.
Yeah.
63 years.
He's our resident authority on ancient coins. And he tells us he started collecting ancient coins when he was a schoolboy and started trading ancient coins when he was a schoolboy. So he's been a wheeler dealer for a long time. But he's really our reference encyclopedia on ancient coins. And today, Colin's giving us a talk on the Greek turtles and tortoises. And I'll hand over to Colin. Over to you, sir.
Firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity of speaking to you again. We've done this many times at the ANS over the years, but it's an opportunity to sort of present another area of numismatics which I haven't talked much about before, and I know that you'll enjoy probably learning about an obscure area but very important area of numismatics, which relates to, as you can see, Greek turtles and tortoises which appear on a coinage of a particular city or island. The answer to this begins, I suppose, in the sense that several weeks ago, the ASAN, Australian Society of Ancient Numismatics, which I run, at Noble Numismatics, had a first return back to the situation after COVID for the last 2 years of meetings, and I wondered what I should take along, so I thought, oh, well, I haven't ever shown some of the coins of Aegina to anybody, so I brought along 20 or so of them today, and I thought it was an opportunity to talk about it because it's an interesting series. And in a book that's just there in front of David at the moment is a book on a handbook on Greek coins and Roman coins by Bill Metcalf. Bill I've known for many, many years, probably for that 40, nearly 35 years anyhow. He was a curator of numismatics at the American Numismatic Society in New York. A good friend of mine. I've had many dinners with him. and he co-authored the editorial of that particular book. And what is more important, he also collected from essays from all around the world. And a good friend of mine, Ken Shooty, whom you know, at Macquarie University, took the opportunity of being asked to write a bit about the Cyclades Islands, and he wrote a little chapter too on Aegina. And I looked at it and I thought, he actually used some of my coins for illustration, which are in that book. So I brought a couple of those coins along to show you. So I thought it's probably worthwhile doing a little talk about it, because it's an interesting series. It doesn't look very different, but they are quite fascinating. It's all to do with the reverse, not the obverse. So I'll start with the first slide. Okay, the written record about the island itself and the coinage is quite interesting, and it's very extensive, and Ken talks about it there a bit, but it's been published in other areas. Ephorus, as I say there, in Strabo, states that the first of the Greeks to mint silver coins were the inhabitants of a small island called Aegina. Now you wonder where it is. It's stuck right there where the red is on that map, which, if you know the map of Greece pretty well, Peloponnese is at the southern left-hand corner. Athens is just slightly above that red dot. And so it's an island stuck in the middle of the Saronic Sea, which in fact is a bit off the beaten track in some respects, but it was very important in ancient times. He also states that the coinage was struck at Aegina by Phidon of Argos in the 7th century BC, who actually lived well before coinage was invented. So we have a problem about the myths building up by historians trying to work out where this idea of coinage began. In fact, coinage didn't begin in Aegina. It began over the water there in what is today Western Turkey, in Asia Minor as it was then known, and it was the silver coins and, well, the electrum coins were made there, which were the precursors to the beginnings of coinage in the silver in Aegina. So, but the Lydian coinage, which is what we're talking about on the western coast of Asia Minor, provided the idea and the technique for the coin manufacture. And so you have this basic idea, a design put on one side and an incused punch being pushed on the other side to sort of give it some sort of authority. But the more important criteria was that the weight standards were constant. So people could get a coin that know it was the right weight and the right quality. In fact, there was a bit of a fraud going on in terms of Lydia, because they're using electrum coins, and the electrum coins were not quite actually... electrum coins were in fact alloyed deliberately with silver and copper or gold. And the quantity of gold is varied. So it sort of passed for right, weight being right, but as for purity, it was variable from issue to issue. Next slide. So we have the earliest coins coming through with the very familiar, as you can see, turtles on the obverse. The title will become more obvious to you when we get through this talk, because of the way it develops. These earliest coins were struck on with an irregular incused reverse pattern, and the beginning began about 555. Good morning or good afternoon.
Sorry, let's not get the...
No, you have further to cover. 555 to 550 BC. So it is very early, and certainly earlier than anything else on the Greek world, on the European world of the Greek world. They were called status, and they were based on a very accurate weight system of about 12.2 grams. The silver was of highest quality because they were going to use this coin for trade, and Aegina became the big trading centre for the whole of that area. And the reverse was selected and the obverse was selected because it did not match any other coins that were coming across across the water that were coming from Western Turkey. So the beginning is indicated by Aegina because it had to make coinage to get grain from Egypt. And silver was in demand throughout the whole Greek world, including Egypt, which wasn't Greek world at the time. So they were known as the prominent traders in the Mediterranean. Why picking a turtle? I suppose it's because they're a sea animal, swimming, and so it was prominent, obviously prominent to the people on this island, and they saw it as being something they could use as their motive, because in typical later Greek coins they picked motives on the coins which were related somehow or other to them, like the owl of Athens being alerted, as you know, in the late 5th century to awaken the Athenians and the Persians were attacking and all the rest of it. So different symbols were used by different Greek cities, and the turtle was selected by Aegina. So the Greek word for ingot, rather interesting too, suggested by the shape of these coins, is chelone, which means turtle. So there's a sort of a link where this name comes from. Could be the animals that came on the island, could have been because they were a seafaring island, and secondly maybe linked with the Greek word itself. Next slide. Now if you notice on that previous slide, the incus was very irregular. Lines running in different directions, but not much sort of organisation on that punches on the reverse. Now the reverse is a key factor for developing the chronology. The obverse is interesting too because it goes through subtle changes. So as I said here, the obverse depicts a turtle which is displayed in high relief, quite high relief, with buttons down the centre. Usually 5 or more, I've seen up to 7 or 8 going down the centre. Later on they go across as well, 3 at the top. A particular variety comes through which is a bit different as well, as we see with this pattern here of the pseudo or proto-tortoise type, proto-turtle type coin. It's one of these. They're quite rare, these ones. There is one in my collection. This wasn't my coin that was illustrated. But you can see the reverses there. It's the punch mark is becoming a little bit more organised. It's in a sort of Union Jack pattern with crosses and both ways, diagonally as well as vertically across and horizontally. As you can see, sub-varieties exist, segments occur in the body. Often there are misshapen flanges, and you'll see 1 or 2 examples of that to show you. And there was also a lot of use of countermarking. We don't know who did the countermarks, except we believe there were some bankers, maybe some magistrates in different places. What they were really doing the countermarks for was checking to see if it was good silver. You know, we didn't want to pass any fakes of these around. In other words, silver coated and base metal underneath, because they were really, it was money. Evolving from that pattern of squares and triangles and so forth, became a type of pattern which looked like a bit like a windmill. There are variations of this, but this is a typical example of the windmill. The reverse is shown here because of the windmill pattern rather than the obverse because of the punch marks, except to show you that they were countermarked. Countermarks were not only weren't letters, they were symbols, and quite diverse. I've seen dogs, and I've seen all sorts of other strange things on these countermarks. There was a time when I owned about 100 of them, all the different countermarks, and the 100 came from a big hoard, which I bought. Most of them have gone now, but I've still got a number of them. But that's one of the interesting ones. Right, next slide. Then we started to develop a pattern change. Instead of the pattern that we saw on the previous slide, we have a development of a strange thing called a skew. It's sort of a vertical horizontal thing and then a triangular cut across dividing one of the corner segments. It started off pretty crudely, and this began about 490 BC. The Persian War obviously impacted the trade, and Athens and the traditional rival became a ruthless trade competitor. So we had a competition occurring between Aegina and Athens for trade. The reverse pattern on that one you see there is quite an early stage of it. It developed into the form that you see quite easily there as a regular pattern, quite different to the early ones we've seen. Mind you, the turtle still appears on the obverse of the coin. But we do see a little development there. There's, this one here has about, well, has 5 verticals, but it's got a couple of dots on the other side of the top, like a T-shape. Sometimes they have up to 5 dots across the top, the buttons as they call it. In other words, the minters were making experiments with style. But you realise the volume of this coinage was very, very large because it was supplying much of the monetary system up to the 5th century for the whole Greek world in terms of trade purposes. But that soon was taken over by Athens. Consequently, the Aegean coinage diminished, and by about 479 BC, after the conclusion of the war, a new style of coinage starts to emerge. Next slide, please. So we have now the arrival of the tortoises rather than the turtles. We have these quite different displayed coins. The turtle, well, they call that the tortoise, the others were the turtles. We're still using the same reverse incus pattern of the skew, as it's called, but after the Persian Wars, the economy recovered of Aegina was slow. Hostility continued. Aegina tried to leave the Delian League in 458, but was recaptured by Athens in 457, which lasted until 445. So we have a gap of about 30 years when coinage really came to an end for Aegina. But it recommenced. So why did he pick this design? Well, the type was possibly selected to the loss of the fortunes at sea, because Athens had replaced them in terms of the main trading power in the Mediterranean. And they reverted to a land animal, or to replace the war on turtles. Because what happened, these turtles continued to circulate, and they continued to circulate for, some hoards have been found as early as the 5th century, 4th century, still carrying coins on it that were over 100 years old. But they get very worn, they're getting calamarked and checked, and so the thing was a continual replacement of the coinage by circulation, and it circulated eventually, of course. Hoards were buried and they became melted down, and the new coinage was there issued to replace the old turtle coinage. Well, you can see what happened. The Aegeans were forced to leave in 431, but returned to the island in 407 BC. So next slide. Then we have the emergence of a new type of official. I've got an example of these two as well. We start to see the name of the city appearing on the coin. So if you're in doubt where they were coming from, AI was the abbreviation for Aegina. Appears on the earliest. Later on, they become on the obverse, across the hurdle, and we had other letters appearing on the reverse, together with things like dolphins and other animals appearing on the reverse. Now we know that the letters like NI and others that appear really are the names of various magistrates who were responsible for that coinage. So we have this evolution taking place, still the same skew pattern, but we have the emergence of letters on the coins. So we have it there is that these help to identify and prove beyond any doubt where these coins come from. Okay, next slide. So other coin denominations were struck as well. Stata, although it was issued in the greatest volume, was certainly the one that had most circulation. But for local use, they needed smaller amounts of money. And if you were trading within the island and so forth, you needed fractions of a stata. You needed drams, you needed triobals, you needed hemidrams, you needed ovals. I think the soldiers' rate of pay was something like about 2 ovals a day or something like that. So you need to have money that was handled, be able to be handled. It took a while until about the sometime in the 2nd century BC. Well, 4th century started, but the 2nd century BC we had also the use of copper. I didn't bring any of those examples along, but these are quite scarce, very tiny, and they feature similar things, except that one on the right has, that's the 3rd line down, has dolphins, but we have the same skew pattern on it. But the slightly later one on the other side has other objects on it, like ships representing trade, I suppose, the ram's head, and so forth. The dram, which is the bottom one there, is a late dram, is issued with these various letters appearing as well, like the statas were issued. Aegean coinage virtually came to an end, but it took another 3 or 4 centuries before they came back again. And one of the most curious things is that the island struck little bronze coins with the names of Septimius Severus, Ageta, and Caracalla, but mostly Septimius Severus, on the obverse of the coin. Sometimes the women as well, Julia Domina might appear. And this is a characteristic you say to yourself, well, what happened that made them issue these bronze coins in the 3rd century, beginning of the 3rd century AD, when it sort of had finished centuries before. And it's taken numismatists a while to discover that the coins from a whole range of cities on the Peloponnese were issuing these coins in the beginning of the 3rd century, these bronze coins, which are quite rare in fact. And it's only in recent times they discover where they're all turning up. They're turning up, not in this area of the islands of Aegina or in the main area of Peloponnese area. There's something like about 30 or so city-struck coins. They're occurring and being found over what is today virtually around Lebanon area, in that part of Syria, Lebanon. And it transpires that the Severan army under Septimius Severus was stationed for a while in the Peloponnese area, and they needed small change. So they manufactured, as they moved around the island, the coins from each of these cities. And being of local use only, most of them kept them in their pockets. And when they moved across to the water, oh, what do we do with these coins? Let's spend them. And of course they were spending them and putting them into circulation. So hordes have turned up in that part of the world with these Severan coins which come from the islands, the Peloponnese, including Aegina. I've got probably about 30 or 40, but they're quite rare actually. They don't turn up very often. Aegina ones are quite rare as well. So that sort of an overview of the coinage by the reverse rather than the obverse between the Greek tortoises and turtles, tortoises and turtles, or turtles and tortoises. So you get the idea that it's an evolutionary process. It's an interesting series, and to enhance that, I've brought along about 20 or so of these pieces to show you of the whole of the development of these things. These things are becoming quite expensive to buy these days. Fortunately, a lot of these I got many years ago, but if you, to buy a nice turtle stater or tortoise stater in top condition, you're paying many thousands of dollars these days for them. So it goes out of the pocket of most of us. But the cheap worn ones still turn up for a few $100s each, particularly the ones with chop marks and marks on them. No, not chop marks, but counter marks on them. So that, I think, brings me to the end of this little view of turtles and tortoises. Thank you. I think that's the next slide, so that's the end.
That's it? One more?
All right.
References?
Now, anyone's got any questions for 3 minutes, I'll try and answer them for you. Otherwise, I'll have a little display here later on. I'll put it together. You can have a look at the coins themselves and handle them and see what they look like and feel them. They're very nuggety, solid pieces of silver. I don't know anyone else who's got many of these sort of coins, but they're an interesting series. And after you get about 10 or 20, 10 to 15 or so of them, you've got the range. There are a few rare varieties which people seek and go for. But basically it's an interesting series. It shows the beginning of coinage in silver in the European world. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Colin, do any of them have magistrate names on them at all?
Yes, the last ones do. Remember we saw NI?
Yeah.
That's the name of someone, probably named Nicholas or Nicomedes or something like that. We don't know their full name. But they put their initials on some of them, and that's not the only ones. There's 3 or 4 different varieties, I believe. I don't have any with the magistrates' names on them here. I have the ones with the letters of like Aegina on them. They tend to be pretty rare, because you must remember this is the end of the period. It's very much a local coinage now. Trade was being taken over by Athens and other cities, so basically they were becoming a minor player. But they were the major player in the 6th century and the early part of the 5th century. By the time we get to the 4th century, or late end of the 4th century, end of the 5th century, beginning of the 4th century, they were a minor outpost in a way, in terms of trade. And so the need was for the big ones for local use only.
Move on.
Okay?
Carl, one
None
question.
there.
What's the spec that's there for numismatics? What's a tortoise and what's a turtle?
Well, one's land going and the other's sea going.
Yeah,
The turtles are believed to be the ones that actually swim around in water. The tortoises are the ones that walk around on Earth. But the turtles get big. You know, there's some in Tonga and so forth, they get up to giant size.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And there's 1 or 2 that live to 160 years or something like that. It's been around longer than anyone can remember.
Well, when I've been brought up through the many years, which you won't talk about, I always thought that turtles had flippers and tortoises had claws.
Pretty much.
Well,
And
that's pretty
it's
right.
much like
They walk on land, so they
Yes.
can't walk around on flippers. The others had flippers. They have sort of feet.
That's right.
In a fashion.
Well, I'm sticking to that too because I think that's right. But there's a lot of arguments about that. That there are differences and variations.
I don't argue about it, I just collect the coins.
I know.
That's what
Which I
that's
do
right.
that too. But it's just one of those funny things that comes up in an argument and it winds up being a little argument.
It
And I
probably
just,
does. I think, you know, I mean, one can do a Google search on this and see what they say. It's fairly apparent that the 2 types were used as coinage. The first was the turtle because it's suggestion of seagoing and the links, of course, and the word I spelled out there was a Greek word for a turtle. But when we get the tortoises, well, they'd lost their seagoing activities to some extent, and the tortoises were probably a few that were floating around, or not floating, but walking around on the island, so they used them as a symbol, carrying on the tradition, if you like.
yeah.
There's a lot into that. You could probably read a bit about that, but the use of the turtle on a coin is quite rare. It's the only turtle or tortoise was the only type used as a main motive on a coin was by Agena. It sometimes appears as a sort of symbol on other coins, but it's very rare. So it stands alone as a symbol of its own on a particular island.
Did you have a catalogue of the early coins like that?
The catalogue.
Have
Well,
you made your own catalogue?
I have, yeah. Some of the ones are written up on my computer, yeah. But I mean, I just describe the coins and suggest the references and similar pieces that exist in other collections that are thereabouts. I brought along 20 of them, which I'll put together when we have a break, and you can have a look at them in the morning tea break. The different types. Unfortunately, they're still in my packet, so I'd ask you not to take them out of the packet, otherwise I'll lose track of which one's which, and the pedigree relates to each one.
Yeah.
But there are, I suppose that made my motivation on these was that I like the fact that they were the first Greek coins in mainland Greece in silver. I like the fact too that several of the coins I got there came from the very famous hoard that was found in Sicily. They circulated everywhere. They've been found everywhere. They were found in the Asyut hoard, which were found, as you know, at the bottom of Egypt. Probably a third of the hoard was these Aegean turtles. They also found in Sicily in hoards, and the hoard there that was found, the Sicyon hoard, which there's two examples of. I got one from Asyut there, and several from the Sicyon hoard, which were found at a place called Selinus hoard, which is a place called Selinus today, but it was called Selinus in ancient times, right at the bottom left-hand side of Sicily. So you've got that part of the world they circulated, you've got southern Egypt, and you've got the whole of the Mediterranean they circulated in. And the proof is in the hoards. So they did move around a lot, and they were used as trade. And they were accepted because of their weight and their purity. So they were good silver, and that's why they're accepted. There's one or two pieces there that when Jim Noble's father, he put the collection in his father's name, sold his collection in England in 1975 at Glendenning's, I brought a couple of pieces of those. They were some of the early ones, which came from Roy Sanson's collection. Roy Sanson was a previous president of the society back in the early 60s. He collected ancient Greek coins, and he's lost his wife and children growing up, so he decided to immigrate back to England, and then decided to travel around the world. I think the last time I heard about him, he's probably passed on by now, he had done the train trip across from Moscow to Vladivostok. He was travelling the world, and he bought a lot of his coins from Baldwin's, and I had a couple of those. Some of the coins I got came from a couple of big treasure troves that were found of countermark pieces, and so all the coins come together from different sources, from very famous hoards, or they come from famous collections. I've still got another 20 or so. These are all I've got left these days, about 40 of them. Thank you. Any other questions? Just time out, I'm not talking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colin. And sort of like
Oh, I
you
get
to
the
have
silver
that
one, do I?
as a-
Oh,
Yes.
silver for silver. That's very
Silver there. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mark. Thank you very much. Good. Thank you. We'll do it again. I've got a glass of water here.
Right.
Thank you.
Hang on. Another one. Telling me all sorts of things.
Smile, you're on candid camera.
Yes, I smile.
Thank you.
Don't forget, you can see all this again on video tomorrow from YouTube. If you missed it, you can still catch up with it.
We're on track.
David was
Dave's setting up.
Brody's.
Yeah, so you want to do the same for me, just I'll stand over there and Colin.
Maybe you can get Colin to do the same for you.
Yeah.
You
While I-
wanna
Yeah.
do the honours?
You want to stick it onto yours, David?
So, yeah, I'll swap your seats here on this one, and I'll come over here.
Oh, it's water, right.
That's your water. Leave it there.
Okay. Here we go.
Right, well, for those of you who don't know, this is David Mee. David collects medieval, and medievals,
And a few ring-ins too.
yeah, but that's from what, about 1000 or earlier?
1000. Yeah, the medieval extends from 500 AD to 1500 AD, basically. The middle 1,000 years.
Right.
But this is not about them.
Anyway, without further ado, we'll pass you on to David.
This is about, you know, a side collection, but a very interesting man, Napoleon Bonaparte. And his lifetime impacts seriously on the early history of Australia too. I didn't want to go into that, but a lot of the early explorers and people we know from the early years of Australia, in fact, fought in the Napoleonic Wars. And so a lot of them, especially Charles Sturt, he fought in the Peninsular War as a young man under Wellington, and you know, comes to Australia and does all sorts of explorations and things, and so many of others had that experience. So it was he had a major impact on the then British Empire, because eventually it was just Great Britain, like they were in the Second World War, against the continent of Europe. And all sorts of interesting stories, and this talk won't cover them. Let me tell you, there's books and books and books written on Napoleon Bonaparte. Anyway, if we just get when he was born and when he died, perhaps would be a useful thing, but he was born in Corsica, and he used to have that nickname, the Corsican, in 1769, in the reign of the old regime of the French King Louis. Now, Corsica at that time had only just become part of France. I've forgotten where it came from originally, probably from Savoy or Sardinia or one of those things, but at this point when he was born, he came from a large family too, and he was sent to France and went to a military school, and in 1785 he graduates as second lieutenant of the artillery. He specialised in artillery, and that was his main thing. And those of you keeping your eye to what's going on in Ukraine, you'll recognise the importance of our artillery in all sorts of military things. Okay, so he was 20 at the storming of the Bastille, at the beginnings of the French Revolution. And he was with his regiment in Paris in 1793, which was the same year that the king was executed by guillotine during the Reign of Terror. However, a bit later than that, 1793, pretty much after the Reign of Terror, but around about the same time, he's a young man, he's stationed at Toulon, and the Toulon is a French naval base in the Mediterranean, and at that point the British had taken it over. They were sort of very much anti the revolution, and they occupied it. And he led this charge against the British successfully and expelled them from Toulon. And here he goes from second lieutenant up to brigadier general, because the French revolutionary period, they were desperate for soldiers who could win victories, and he was seen as a man who could do this. So here he is at a young age, and this was the revolutionary war period. I tell you that the Napoleonic period is set into two parts. One, the revolutionary part, where he was in charge of the revolutionary brigades, armies, whatever. That was his career there. And then, as we'll see, mid-career, he decides, I'll make myself emperor. He crowns himself emperor. And from then on, there was a brief period, called the Treaty of Amiens, where they actually had a peaceful 9 months, or however it lasted, with the British. And then but as you see, his second half. So they're called the Revolutionary Wars, followed by the Napoleonic Wars when he was emperor. Next one. Okay, he becomes the commander of the French army in Italy in 1796. He crosses the Alps famously. He also at the same year marries Josephine Beauharnais, crosses back Alps and wins many battles against Austria, and he returns to France as a hero, because here he is, this young general in his early 20s, winning against the seasoned battles of Austria mainly, because they occupied the northern Italy in those days. And there were lots of republics established by him and the French armies in the northern Italy. They didn't last very long, but they minted coins, and I'll show you a few of the coins of these French republics. And you might look at them and think, oh, you know, sort of no portraits of anybody much, but they're interesting just the same. Anyway, he was given the command of the army in 1798 to go and try and kick the British influence out of Egypt. There's still, I mean, British Navy was the big enemy. At this stage, they had occupied a lot of Europe, the French Revolutionary armies, not just him, but a lot of other generals. And anyway, went to Egypt. He conquered Malta on the way. French overran Malta, French army. And that was the end of the Knights of Malta, never to be resurrected. 1798, the Battle of the Pyramids, Alexandria and Cairo fall. The big downer for him was that Horatio Nelson, with a British fleet, has the Battle of the Nile, so called, Bukir Bay. That's the bay outside Alexandria, the sort of bay outside the Nile Delta, and he defeats the French fleet and sinks the treasure ship that has all the stolen loot from Malta. So they're battle at the bottom of the Mediterranean, covered with Nile mud each year, and never find that again. Anyway, he abandoned his army in Egypt. He thought it was too important to worry about them. They had to find their way home, and he returns to France and leads a coup against the Directory, setting himself up as first consul of France and leader of the government. This is when he starts to mint coins, but he's not emperor yet. He's just the first consul of France. Returns to Italy in 1800, defeats the Austrians at a decisive battle of Marengo. Issued coins to celebrate that, actually, which I've got to show you. And eventually he was always worried about him and the Pope. They're not great friends at the moment, but he does somehow get some peace deal going between them. Next one. Yeah, typical. Oh, you go to the Louvre, you see all sorts of Napoleonic paintings by the French painter David. Here he is, the heroic man crossing the Alps to do these wonderful things. Next. Just a few words about dates. You pick up the revolution, get the revolutionary coins, and you see, we're looking for the date, 17, no. It's often the year something, like long, the year, that's French, L''AN, and then a number, which is the year. And it's the year from the Republic, the 22nd of September 1792. That was year one, day one of the new Republican calendar. It didn't last. They kept on using these dates right up to about 1804, and then they scrapped them and went back to the calendar that everybody else was using. But there's two interesting things to note about this. One, it starts in September, so like their autumn equinox, the European autumn equinox, and so that it doesn't correspond exactly to, you can't translate exactly without knowing whereabouts in the year it was. And then, just to add a bit of interest to the calendar, they decided, and the French decided a lot of things, that Republican was going to be the brand new start of everything. They renamed all the months. And we went off to look at, you don't need to do this, so if you read it about it, and they talk about, for instance, the famous coup that enabled Napoleon to become first consul was the 18 Brumaire, or 18 Brumaire, and that's the misty month, which, as you see there on the little table there, is somewhere starting in October the 22nd. But they're all, their names all for sort of seasons and the type of months that they experience in Europe. Next one. Okay, there was this peace I was talking about, peace with Britain by the Treaty of Amiens, the end of the Revolutionary Wars. This is a very interesting period. Napoleon sells the Louisiana Territory to USA, and then 1803, the war of the treaty ends. I'm not sure why, and probably because someone broke the truce. But in 1804, he crowns himself Emperor of the French in Notre Dame. Wouldn't let the Pope crown him. He didn't want it to be under the authority of the Pope. No, he put the crown on himself. His wife gets crowned as Empress at the same time. Then back into Italy, he's crowned King of Italy in Milan, but the French fleet was destroyed at the Battle of Trafalgar. It's a cape off off Spain in the Atlantic, but Nelson was killed, unfortunately. But Napoleon goes on winning all sorts of battles against Austria, Russia, and the Prussians. He does sign a treaty with Russia and creates the Duchy of Warsaw, but as we'll see, and as I'm sure you know, next one, here he is, crowning himself, famous painting. Not sure where, I think that's in the Louvre. Yep, next. Okay. They occupy the armies of Iberian, Napoleonic armies occupy Iberian Peninsula, that's just Spain and Portugal. He appoints his brother King of Spain, we'll come to that later, divorces Josephine. She, the main reason being she never had any children with him, and she wanted a son. And marries Marie Louise of Austria, that's Louise, misspelled. And she does bear him a son who becomes Napoleon II, but doesn't have a very illustrious career compared to his father. But the British are on the march. Oh, sorry, has this disastrous Russian campaign we all know about. If anyone read War and Peace or even seen the movie, you'll know all about that. Interestingly, and I haven't mentioned on the slides, but one of the first things that happened in the revolution is the French armies went north and they took over what is now Belgium and Holland too. And any country that he sort of took over and declared it French, basically they become new conscripts for his armies. So this is and I didn't know it before, but he a lot of the French, so-called French soldiers who went with him all the way sort of west to east from Lithuania to Moscow, you know, during the retreat, they were Dutchmen and Belgians, not just Frenchmen. And of course they're all completely ill-equipped for the Russian winter. Anyway, that's where we are. Wellington's army advances through Spain. We have the Peninsular Wars, and eventually Wellington is successful and he marches up into Toulouse. Napoleon resigns, exiled to the island of Elba off Tuscany, and there he has a bit of the run of the place. And the Bourbon King Louis XVIII, who was Louis XVI's brother, younger brother, restored to the throne of France. And then we all know what happened next. Eventually Napoleon escapes, and you get to he turns up in France at Marseille, and you get this period called the 100 Days. So it's 100 days that he marches through France, collecting all his former supporters, all his generals who are now traitorous to the French king. They all want an empire back again, and gathers a huge army behind him, and then he's there at Waterloo, and that's the end of him. Gets sent to Elba, and a few years later he dies. So gets sent to St Helena, the island in the Atlantic, and dies at age 51. Okay. Yeah, this is all about his siblings, really. He has 4 brothers and 3 sisters who made it to adulthood. Like many 18th century families, they had probably twice as many kids, and babies died in those days very easily. So they're just the ones who made it to adulthood. His first brother was a year older than him. He wasn't the first or two. Joseph was born a year older, and he has coins in his name, and we'll see a lot of those. Some of those. Then there's Napoleon, who became the first consul and then Emperor of France. Of course, he has many coins. I only got 1 or 2 to show you today. Lucien, 6 years younger, he was sort of the right-hand man in France. So the only coins issued in France proper were coins of Napoleon. So Lucien didn't get a mention, no coins. But Eliza is the first girl, 8 years younger, and he has a coin portrait, so I'll show you that one. Louis, 9 years younger than Napoleon, he had coins. Once again, we'll talk about that. Pauline, 11 years younger, she didn't produce any coins. But she was the most interesting one of the lot. She married a French marshal who went over to Haiti, San Domingo in the West Indies, when there was a revolution, and they tried to put that down. And this was a revolution against slavery. And Haiti is sort of what it is to now because of that. And then there was Caroline, the youngest sister, 13 years younger, and she didn't produce any coins, but because she was married to one of his marshals who did, we'll show you that. And then the younger, the baby of the family, Jerome, he was 15 years younger than Napoleon, so almost another generation. But, and he did issue coins, there's coins with his portrait. So next one, here we go, coins. These are what some of the early republics coins look like. Most of them are minted about the 1798, that's just at the turn of the 19th century. And there's the top one there is for the Republic of Naples. And you also notice too that, just to try and read this, the reverse for you, Anno Settimo della Liberty. So this is the 7th year. It's sort of like a Republican date, but I'm not quite sure how it translates to Italian, because it's an Italian coin from Naples. Mind you, this has also got an interesting story to it. While the French army was coming, the King of Naples needed to get out of there. He wasn't going to. So who took him? Well, Nelson was having his affair with Emma Hamilton, the wife of the ambassador, British ambassador there. But he offered his flagship to take the king from Naples to Palermo in Sicily, because Sicily wasn't threatened by the French. So that's interesting. I thought lots of interesting stories here. Then we have, Napoleon appeared in front of Venice with his artillery and threatened to blow the place to bits unless the Venetians surrendered, which they did, thank God, and Venice survived. But that's a Venetian coin of their republic, Anno della Liberty, yeah, but it's also got a date, 1797, so yeah. The one in the bottom corner is an interesting one. It's the Roman Republic, not the Roman Republic of ancient times, but the Roman Republic, which lasted for about 6 months, set up in the model of the French Republic. This was the Republican times, and about 1799 that coin is, and quite interesting, quite rare. So you see they're all effigies of things, mostly with liberty caps and fasces and so on. Next one. A couple more. Ligurian Republic, 1798. The Anno 8th, you can see Pratil, so you know, that's one of the other months. Anno 8, that's the Cisalpine Republic, a republic set up for the northern Italy after Napoleon's second conquest. And I told you, here we are, the gold one there in the corner. This is that famous Battle of Marengo, which was in the Piedmont Plain, Marengo, and you see it's actually got it in French. Let's look at the portrait side, which is this Liberty, looking like a Greek goddess. It says, Italy delivered at Marengo. It's in French, delivré à Marengo. And then on the reverse where it says 20 francs, l'an 10, the year 10, Liberté, Égalité, and they didn't have room for fraternité, but they, Eridania was the name given. I think it's named after a river in Piedmont somewhere. That's the whole of sort of centred around Turin, the whole Piedmont plain was called then Eridania. And they're also called subalpine Gaul, because the one on the bottom corner there, the big one, Gaul subalpine, 5 franc, l'an 10, same year, Liberté, Égalité, and Eridania, so the reverse is similar. But what I wanted to show you is the statue, the two figures there, clearly France and Italy embracing, although very much under the French, and that the figure is on the right is interesting because she is holding a spear with a liberty cap on the top. So what can you see what she's holding underneath with the other hand on her left hand? Yeah, it's a plumb bob. It's a level.
Oh, is it?
You see, you know how the level works. You've got a right angle triangle and a flat bottom, like isosceles triangle, and you've got a plumb bob sitting in the apex. And the idea is you move that triangle so the plumb bob sits right vertical through the middle of it, and then you know the bottom is perfectly level. Égalité, level. This is the symbol of égalité. And That's how they virtually denote the effigy of Egalite always. But it means equality. And of course, equality had to be, because in those days, before the revolution in France, an aristocrat was worth like 10 peasants in the court. You had to have many more people to have evidence to contradict the aristocrat, whose word was just always accepted by the court. So it was a very important thing, egalitarian. Okay, next one. Here we are, Napoleon Bonaparte as first, here we are, Bonaparte Premier Consul. And this is the year 12. So it's around about 1801 to that type of 20 thing. French Republic, République Française. In those days, the hair is quite different from a bit later. Always, you know, empire, not quite empire style yet. Next. And this one is King of Italy. He was the King of Italy too. That Cisalpine Republic became a bit later the Kingdom of Italy. And here we are. And he's King in 1808. So here we are. He's already Emperor, Emperatore Re, and King of Italy, and Regno d'Italia, 40 lira. And that quite extensive shield there is all the little previous areas of Italy, in the northern Italy, Lombard Plain, which made it up. And the city, it's the scutcheon blazoned on the French eagle, the imperial eagle. A nice coin. I've got a silver one, a 5 lira, but not this one. Okay, we're getting onto the siblings now. There's a portrait of Eliza Bonaparte. Now, he made sure his sisters, he always did well for his family. Napoleon made sure his sisters married well, preferably to rich people who could support them in the style that they'd like to be supported. So there's Eliza and her husband Felix Baiocchi, and they were the sort of ruling of the northern area of Tuscany, Lucca and Piombino. Piombino's, I've never been there. I've been to Lucca, but not Piombino. But from map, it looks as though you can look out across the sea and see the island of Elba in the distance. So it's about that area. But that's quite a nice, nice Dewgate portrait of the two. But notice Eliza's in the front. Otherwise, that's significant. Okay. Joseph Bonaparte. Remember, he was the eldest brother. He was 1 year older than Napoleon, and he wanted someone to he could rely on to do what he wants, and he was made King of Naples. And there he is. So it looks, I mean, they all look a bit like Napoleon, but not quite. And Joseph Napoleon, DG, Sicily Rex, King of Sicily, they called it at that stage. And you notice that anyone who's been to Sicily, that little symbol in the bottom of the shield there, the little triskelius, which is, you know, on lots of Sicilian souvenirs, they put that on still. And anyway, there he is. But he didn't last very long in Sicily because Napoleon needed a king to rule in Spain, which was the more important kingdom. So he, next one, he sent Joseph to Spain to be king in Madrid. And he duly complied, and then he still needed a king of Sicily. So who did he put there? One of his marshals, Joachino Murat, as king. He ruled. But he was the husband of Caroline, the younger sister. So she was Queen of Naples, but she didn't get to be on a coin. This is one of 1809. There's lots of lovely portraits of Joachim. He was a bit of a good-looking guy, and he liked it, and he knew it, you know, and he liked to show off and everything. But you know, that curly hair and everything, characteristic. Next one. Here's Joseph as King of Spain. This is a very nice coin, apart from the scratch on his cheek, by De Gracia, 1809. And yeah, Hispania, and it's an interesting shield. I mean, if you looked at coins of Spain, you'll know, and it corresponds to the title there. You've got the, on the top right, you've got the Castle of Castile, then you've got the Lion of Leon, then below that in the middle you've got the vertical stripes of Aragon, or what we call Catalonia, and then on the right of that you've got the chains of Navarre, and down the bottom on the left you've got the pomegranate of Granada, and on the right you've got the twin pillars of Hercules, which is everything else beyond the pillars of Hercules. The pillars of Hercules being, of course, the Rock of Gibraltar and whatever's on the other side. So that was the Spanish one. Not too much. Back a couple. Can you go back?
Can we go back?
Yeah, previous. Previous. Yeah, previous. No. Previous. That's it. Click.
Sorry?
Just one more. Too. I'm not sure. Maybe that's right. No, you're good. We've done that. All right. Next one. Back to the gold one. Okay. This is the. This is his next brother. This is Louis Napoleon Koning van Holland. He was made King of Holland. The Dutch had a revolution early, and Holland in this case was not only the Dutch area we know it was also Belgium, included the whole Netherlands, and he was made king there. He wouldn't really do what Napoleon wanted to do. Napoleon considered him too gentle, and so he was removed, and now he stayed there for a couple of years. But the story goes, he wanted to be very much like the Dutch, and he got up. He couldn't speak Dutch very well. He did put the effort in, but the trouble is there's a word in Dutch that sounds like king, but it means rabbit, and so he got up and said, you know, people, I'm your new rabbit. Whether that's apocryphal or not. But you see here, this is a ducat, a Dutch ducat, but of 1810, and it's the Kingdom of Holland. And the shield there is on the I suppose you call it the line rampant of Holland, Belgium, and then on the other corners it's the imperial eagle of France. Well, it was considered part of France in those days. That's why you could conscript the people and take them to Moscow and get them killed on the way back. But it's a nice little coin, and the only one I've got. There is another little thing I need to tell you about him. You've all have heard a note about Napoleon III, the Second Empire, a lot later. Well, Napoleon himself, first, when he was, he married Josephine, and instead of, he didn't have any children, but this was her second marriage too, and she had 2 children. And Napoleon adopted them as his children. But he married the daughter. The one was a boy, one was a girl. He married the girl, and they were the parents of Napoleon III. So they were all related. So Napoleon I was actually Napoleon III's uncle, because this was the brother. Next one. And the last one, the youngest brother, when I say 15 years younger than Napoleon, he was given the Kingdom of Westphalia. This is the German one. There he is, Hieronymus or Jerome Napoleon, and 2/3 of a thaler, König von Westphalen, and 1813. That was the year that Napoleon was defeated and by the Battle of the Pyrenees and Toulouse. So it didn't last very long. Went to America and married a rich heiress there, and had a gay time in America after the wars. As a lot of Napoleon's family went to America too. Okay, next one. I think that might be it. Actually, yes, that's the end. So there you are, a snapshot of some of the goings on in the early part of the 19th century. And the defeat of Napoleon in 1815 was a great sigh of relief to Europe, and they all went back to doing what they were doing before that, but not quite. He did really leave a lasting legacy on their law system and their structures. Nobody wanted to go back to the old system, and then they had this Congress in Vienna starting in 1814 where they decided to go back, and nobody would want to at all. So yes, they put up with the royalty for a while in France. 2 brothers of the executed Louis XVI were kings in turn, then a cousin, and then finally they decided, heck, we don't want that anymore, so the Second Republic, short-lived while Napoleon III took over and became the Second Empire, got absolutely defeated in the Franco-Prussian War. They didn't want any of that, and so there was a wonderful period from then to the beginning of World War I, which they call La Belle Epoque, and all the music and paintings, the Impressionist period. That was one of the best periods of France, but the First World War was a disaster, and you know the history from then on. So thank you very much.
Any questions?
You haven't told the story about the famous saying based on his name.
The famous,
Saying, the English saying,
you want to tell it?
English nurses would terrorise their young charges because they thought that Napoleon was going to invade England. And they would say, the bony man is going to get you. But that was corrupted down to the modern saying, the boogie man is going to get you.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. Well, look, they were scared, there's no doubt they were scared. The famous English channel that's saved Britain in many times of invasion, saved them then because of the British Navy. This is why the British Navy was made the senior service, because without the Navy, you know, things would have really gone bad. But they could blockade the channel and stop them, you know, sink the French fleet. And of course, Horatio Nelson, the great hero, he didn't live to see the end, but you know, we've got this great big column of his on Trafalgar Square, which the pigeons drop all the time.
Colin's got a question.
So that's yeah.
Two things actually. The first thing was that what Napoleon defeated Russia was repeated, of course, by Hitler.
Absolutely.
So the winter beats them all the
Absolutely.
time. And of course,
Something to
there's
know
a little
about.
bit of that going on at the moment. The other thing was that the very famous saying of "able was I saw elbow," which can be written the same forward and backwards as well. Not only the sort of rephrase going to elbow.
Yeah, no.
If you look at the words "able was I saw elbow," you're right the other way. It comes out exactly the same.
There's a little prologue to the Bonaparte. They were cursed. They individually inherited familial gastric cancer that killed them. Only one escaped, and Bonaparte died of gastric cancer.
Okay.
It's
Yeah,
very unusual.
Bonaparte didn't live he died at 51.
Well, 51, yes.
So not a long lived, but I mean, you know, with his life, what amazes me is how he got around, how quickly he was able to move through Europe. No doubt, air carriage devoted to him and escorts and so on to clear the roads, but he just could get around so quickly. That's hard to believe, you know, Italy 1 minute, then Germany the next, and across to Russia and so on. Yes, so, and without cars, all horse and buggy, that's amazing. But look, there's a lot to know about it, and of course, if you're really into Napoleon, the coins are not the thing. It's the medals. Every battle and everything he did, he made the medals, a lot of them bronze, but there's precious metals as well. So if you're really into Napoleon, that's where you're going to start with the medals.
The coins that you've shown, were they made in France or in a different country?
No, a lot of them were made in the countries there because, you know, Italy was pretty good at making coins. They had a huge history of the modern coins, so yes, you usually commandeer them in to make them. I think they're all made in Italy actually. Because we weren't too sure about whether we could project on it and so on, you know, we're asked to bring the coins, so I've got almost all of those coins in my bag here. When I look at them, and one of the ones I like is that gold coin of Marengo. I think that is a fabulous coin.
Yeah.
What we'll do, David, we'll probably, you and I, and anyone else that's got displays, we'll put them on the table over there so people can look at them
Yeah, we could do that.
during the day.
I don't want to bore you to tears, but yeah, we could do that.
Well, thank you very much for your...
My pleasure, my pleasure. Oh, thank you for that. I should have apologised for Judy not being here. You know, she often comes to conferences and so on, but we've got our sister-in-law living with us at the moment, and so she's...
You could have brought her too.
No, thank God.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
The kettle's on, so it's time for a cuppa. Well, one kettle's on.
Well,
Okay.
I only have one kettle and don't forget.